would have 2 designers and 5 viewers. Then beyond those base packages, you can add individual designers and individual viewers when you have the multi-user package. So beyond the demo today, we will pass along everybody's information back to Abila or back to the partner you signified when you registered for this webcast. We'll pass your information back to them for following up. They'll be able to answer additional product questions that you may have. They can provide you some product pricing, any product training options. They'll be able to share with you how they implement the product. But that will be really kind of the response that you'll get based on when you conclude today's demonstration. You'll have a feedback form that you can let us know what areas or questions you want to have answered when that follow-up from your partner or from Abila occurs. And as Robbie mentioned earlier, we are going to record this webcast today, so if you want to get a copy of the webcast, please denote that as well. We'll be providing your partner or Abila a copy of this webcast so they can share that with you when they follow up. So at this point, I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and turn it over to Robbie and have him take us through a demonstration of DrillPoint.
Okay, thanks, Bob. All right, so we're going to just jump right into the overview. And again, as we mentioned, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to enter those into the questions section there on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll pause periodically throughout the overview to take those questions and get those answered as well. So, just kind of starting out here, you see that I'm in Microsoft Excel. And as Bob mentioned in his overview, DrillPoint is what we would call a Microsoft Excel add-in. So once you install DrillPoint on your computer system, the next time you come into DrillPoint or into Excel, you're going to see at the top of the screen, you're going to see a new menu item embedded within your copy of Excel that says DrillPoint. So once you install that, then that's going to give you access to be able to use DrillPoint. And you can see over here on the far left, there's a log in and a log out area. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to physically log in to DrillPoint. Once you log in, that's going to establish the level of user that you are. Bob mentioned a designer and a viewer. So that's going to really determine what type of DrillPoint user that you are, okay? And it's also going to establish any account level security settings that may be set up for you within the MIP system. So, you know, for your department managers or your grant managers, maybe you want to restrict them down to only being able to see activity within their department or in their grants or within the programs that they manage. So you can easily do that through the advanced security system within MIP. And once you do that, all of those security settings will flow seamlessly over to any report that that user runs within DrillPoint, okay? Now, what we're looking at here on the screen is what we would call a report template, okay? So this report is in what we call design mode. So if you look up here at the top under the session area, you can see it says report mode, it says design. So what we like to do here in DrillPoint is we want to go ahead and be able to kind of create the layout of the report. And when we're talking about the layout, we're also referring to any type of formatting that you want to see within the report. And for formatting, we're talking about things like bolds, you know, highlights, underlines, making various different colored sections within the report, things of that nature. So anything that you're probably currently doing now after the fact, you're probably running these reports within MIP, exporting them out to Excel, and then every time you export them, after that, you then have to go through the process of adding your formatting, okay? So with DrillPoint, it's a one-time thing. You go ahead and create that layout and that template, and then from that point forward, it's just a matter of going up here and clicking Report Refresh at the top of the screen, okay? Now, because I'm logged in as a designer, I have access to all these maintenance items for the report. Now, when your viewers log in, they won't even see these options here. The only option that they'll have is this Report Refresh, right? So they can come in here and run this report. Now, you can see that in terms of the contents of this report, you can see if you look here in column A that I've just highlighted, this is my report layout. And this is very similar to over in the base MIP system, the financial statement format. This is the equivalent over in DrillPoint. We call this the FRO, and that stands for Financial Report Outline. So just like in MIP in the base reports, over in DrillPoint you're going to create these outlines for the reports, and then you're going to determine for each report what outline you want to use. Okay. Now, we're going to get into, in just a few minutes, we're going to get into how you actually create these outlines. So what you're going to see when we create these outlines is that you have a lot more flexibility for grouping and filtering within rows and sections of the report here. A lot of advantages here that you currently don't have in the base MIP system. Now, if you look at the next couple columns, B and C, these are just showing the account and the description, right? Now, if you look in columns B and C, because we're in design mode right now, what it's showing you is the segment grouping, right? So in the revenue section, what I'm doing is I've actually chosen the GL segment to be my grouping, but down in the expense section, I'm actually grouping that by program. Now, what this represents a segment of my chart. So as Bob mentioned, this being completely integrated with your MIP system, once you install DrillPoint, it knows what your chart of accounts looks like. It knows all of your segments. It knows all the values of those segments. It also knows what your closing account assignments are. So if you're running reports here in DrillPoint and you're crossing fiscal periods, DrillPoint knows how to close that out for you. Okay, so cross fiscal year reporting is easily handled as well within here. And as I mentioned, it also knows your fiscal start date and end date. So when you're running those reports based on fiscal periods, it knows what that is as well. And then, as I mentioned, the account level security. So all of that is inherently built in behind the scenes. It's not anything that you have to do. You don't have to define that. DrillPoint's reading that configuration from your MIP system in real time. So once you finish completing the layout, and you can see these next couple columns, what I've got here is I've got a couple of actual columns, and this is going to be a prior period, and this is going to be the current period with the variance. And then this next section is, these are budget columns. So this is going to give me my budget, and then it's going to give me a variance, and then a percentage of budget consumed, right? So because we're using Excel, look right here in the formula. See, I've just simply put a formula in there. So once I run the report as a user, these formulas are going to get updated as well in real time. Okay, so let me just go ahead and refresh the report. So when you click Report Refresh, this pops up another box. This pops up your kind of ability to apply other formatting and filtering at the report level. Okay, first thing I want to point out here is this effective date. Now, this is a very key date for DrillPoint. What you're going to see when we actually get over to the designs part of the report is that each column in the report in DrillPoint can have its own time frame. So think about now currently in MIP or most reporting systems, when you run those reports, typically you have kind of a start date and an end date, and everything on the report generally falls within that range of dates. Well, DrillPoint's giving you more flexibility by allowing you to have really any defined time frame in each column of the report. Okay, but this effective date is very key, a very key component. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And down at the bottom, you can see it's pulling in my chart of accounts. So this chart of accounts has a fund, grant, GL, program, department, and then a 117 segment. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm filtering this particular report to a series of programs. So I'm using a range of programs. And just so you can see the integration, if I click on that specific tab, it shows me all of my programs. So for example, if I wanted to add maybe say a fund filter at the top level of the report, I could come to my fund filter, click select, and now it pulls in a list of all of my funds. So I could pick a single fund to filter by or a combination of funds. So that's where you start getting into the true integration with your system. So we're going to go next, and then these are just default reports options here. Typically, you're not changing these, and let's go ahead and click refresh. So now what I'm doing is I'm actually running this report. So what's happening is DrillPoint's going out to my MIP system, and it's grabbing the data that I've requested for this specific spreadsheet or this specific report. Okay? Then it's going to bring that back, and then this last step that it's doing as it's generating the report and finishing up is it's applying all of the formatting, all of the formulas and so forth that I've requested within this report. All of that's being generated in real time, and all that formatting is being applied. So think about now the time you're spending exporting stuff and then doing this after the fact is now all built into your report. So now you can see I have a completed report with actual live data in it, and all of my dates and stuff in my column headings in the report heading is filled in real time as well. So this is my revenue section and my expense section, and I mentioned already how you can group in the layout, you can group each section of the report by any single segment or any combination of segments, right? So maybe up here in the grant revenue section, even though for this report I said I only wanted to group by GL account, I could have specified I want to group by GL account and grant. That way I would get a row within this section for each combination of grant and that GL account. Okay, so a lot of flexibility in your groupings. Now that I have the report, you can see it did apply all my formatting, it updated all of my formulas and so forth. But let's scroll down to the expense area here because I want to show you the drill down capabilities within the report. So under administrative expenses, maybe I want to look at this adult seniors program, and this is my current year amount. I want to see what makes that total up. So I simply click on that number within the report, and look, it drills down and shows me all of the general ledger detail that makes up that total number on the report itself. Okay, so I have access to drill down to the first level of detail, which is the general ledger detail. Now, you can do a lot of different things with this information here. You can sort and summarize based on any column. So for example, everything is really put in by session, right, within MIP. So what if I wanted to sort and summarize by session? I just highlight that column and say sort by that and summarize, and look what it does. It groups transactions together. Then it gives you a subtotal at that level, right? So for each session, I can get a subtotal. I can also do that same subtotaling by the different segments or combination of segments on here. So what if I wanted to say, I wanted to see a subtotal by fund and grant? I can choose summarize segments. I can choose fund, grant as my two segment combinations, say sort and summarize. So now look what it does. It gives you a subtotal by the combination of fund and grant in the drill down, okay? Now, on the far right, you probably noticed here that it shows the status of the transaction. All of this is posted. When you run the report, you do have the flexibility to include unposted transactions into the report if you choose to do that. That's an option that the designer can set when they're building the report. And then through the security of the report, the designer can determine when someone runs this report whether or not they can change that setting. Right, so maybe you never want unposted transactions to appear in this specific type of report. You can set that to not allow and then lock that down so that when the viewer runs the report, they're not able to change that setting. Okay, so we've looked at the top level of detail, but now let's take a look. Let's kind of drill down even further from this. So let's scroll down here. I have a specific invoice that I want to take a look at. So I'm looking at this accounts payable invoice here that was for a computer for the daycare program. I'm going to click on the invoice number here, 1014, and then it brings up all of the related transaction information for that specific invoice. Okay. Now, if you look at the tabs across the top of the report, this first tab shows me all of the accounts payable data. So I can see the invoice number, the date, vendor, and all that stuff, as well as all of the GL distribution. So I can see the expense allocation for the entry itself. On this next tab shows me whether or not that we've actually paid this invoice in the system. We can see that we have, and if we have, it's going to show you the check number that paid it. It's also going to show you whether or not that check has cleared our bank, and if it has, what day did it clear. Okay. Now, if you wanted to see the check details, you could simply click on the check number. Now, that's pulling up a copy of the check in terms of what the cash allocation was. So we can see here the cash account it came from, the funds, and the specific grants that were charged for that payment. Now, if you're using the purchase order and encumbrance and requisition system within the MIP product, you'll have this tab as well that says purchasing. So that'll show you if there's a purchase order attached to the invoice itself. So if we click on the purchase order, we can see all of the PO information. If we go to the items tab of the purchase order, we also can see that there was a requisition that preceded the purchase order. We can click on that requisition number. Now we can look at the items on the requisition as well as all the notes and history in terms of, you know, when it was put in, when it was given approval, and so forth through the requisitioning process. So all of that's available through the drill down. Also the attachments, if you're using MIP's attachments, you have the ability to access those as well. So I simply just clicked on a copy of the PDF that was scanned and attached to that invoice. And if you have any user-defined fields associated with AP, those are going to show up here as well. Okay. So just to quickly review what we did here is we ran the report, okay, and we got updated real-time information, and then we were able to drill down to the general ledger detail, and then from that we were able to drill all the way down to all of the source transactions that had any impact on that top-level transaction. We were able to do that all within DrillPoint through our drill down capabilities. So that capability is available not only for designers but for viewers. So think about now all the reporting that you're probably doing and then sending out to people within the organization, and then there's questions, then you have to take time to answer those questions. With a tool like DrillPoint, you could simply provide them their own Excel report. They could log in as a viewer, click refresh, run their reports, and if they have questions about the numbers, they can simply click on and drill down and see all of the underlying details associated with information on their reports. Okay? All right, we're going to pause here for just a second and take questions that might be.
Well, there's one question, and that is, do we work with pivot tables?
Yes, you can actually create pivot tables that work in conjunction with the data. So what you would do is you would build the pivot table, and you would link the data within the report to the pivot table. That way, every time you refresh the report, that pivot table is going to be updated. Let me show you an example of that. If you'll notice within this workbook, I've got several tabs, right? I have something that I call a stress test. So this is actually pulling, you know, some balance sheet information as well as some payroll expense information. You can see I'm using various time frames. But what I'm doing here is I'm creating what I call a stress test, right? So this actually is showing me from a cash perspective how well off the organization is, okay? And so that's one tab. This other tab was my revenue and expense report. On this other tab, I actually have a balance sheet. So within one workbook, you can have multiple types of reports, right? You don't have to have a single Excel document for each report. You can have those basically on each tab. Then you can run and refresh those reports as you need to. But I've got one here at the very beginning that I call dashboard. So once I click on this dashboard view, these charts are linked to these other two reports, actually all three of these reports in real time, right? So what I do is rather than having to create these charts every single time I need them, I just created this dashboard and I created my reports. So then when I refresh the reports, I know my charts are going to get updated in real time. So you can see what we've got here. This is showing sources of revenue by type of revenue. This is showing us our revenue trend, you know, current year versus the prior year by type of revenue. Here's our budget analysis by program. This is the cash stress test that I was referring to. So as an organization, we've set a goal of a 48% ratio. Well, you can see right now where we are is we're at 67 based on my stress test value formulas that I've put in. So this, again, this kind of helps you monitor your cash. This is showing you your cash balance at the beginning of the period, what your net was, and then what your ending cash balances are. And then these are just showing you your current balance sheet balances. This is our payables and our receivables. Okay, so the key concept here is that, again, you're not having to recreate this every single time you need this type of report. It's just a matter of coming in here and clicking on a refresh button in real time. Okay. Other questions?
That is it for now.
All right. So let's switch gears. That was really kind of from a viewer's perspective, running and refreshing the report. So now let's go back to report design. So I'm going to click report design, and so now it takes me back to my template. So I mentioned earlier there was two specific components to every report that you have to have. One is you have to have the outline, okay, so that's in column A, and then you have to simply add your columns to the report. You can have as many columns as you need, and those columns can be columns that are actually pulling data and information from MIP, or they might just simply be Excel formulas, which in this case columns F, H, and I are just simply Excel columns with formulas in them. So let's look at the report layout. So up at the top under the maintenance area, I have this option that says report maintenance. If I click on report maintenance, this gives me a list of all of the outlines that I've created for use within DrillPoint. Okay, so the one that we're using on this report is the one called basic revenue and expense, which is this one right here. So I'm going to click that one and I'm going to edit that. Now when I edit that, this is the design window for the layout. So you can see what you see here within the window is an exact duplicate of what you see here in column A on the report. Okay, but this is where you actually design the layout. So you have complete control over what this layout looks like. There really are no barriers to or restrictions to that. So you can see everything's kind of in a tree format where you have these top-level headings, and in this case I have revenues, and then I have expenses, and then within each of those kind of top-level sections I've got these subgroupings. I have a grant revenue area, a program, other, and so forth. So what happens is when you put a specific subsection in this case grant revenues, you then need to tell the report what do you want to include in the grant revenue section of the report, right? So I'm going to edit that specific section. So you can see when you click edit, it brings up another design window. So hopefully what you're seeing here with DrillPoint is that you don't have to be technical, right? You don't have to know table names, field names, how to join this and that together. We've done all the heavy lifting for you behind the scenes. You're just simply using this report wizard, if you will, to create the sections that you need on the report and then applying any Excel formatting. So what we've done here with the grant revenue section, this grouping area right here tells the report what segment of your chart you want to use as the grouping. Right, so I'm just using the GL segment up here, but as I mentioned, you can combine segments. So maybe you wanted to show the GL and then the grant. Maybe you want to dash between those two. So to see right here, it's showing you a preview. So you can use really as many segments, kind of put them together in more of a linear account structure, if you will, using the segments with your chart. And then down at the bottom, this is your filter section. So we're giving you 3 methods for filtering within that section of the report. So if you think about when you're doing this in MIP, when you're creating financial statement formats, right, and you create a category, there's that other tab that says Assign Accounts, right? So you create the category, and then you click on that Assign Accounts, and then you tell MIP which GL accounts need to go into that category, right? Well, look what we're doing here in DrillPoint. We're not limiting you to just the GL segment. We're pulling in every segment of your chart, so we're giving you greater flexibility for creating sections or rows within a report for data more than just the GL segment, okay? So an example there might be, right now I'm just pulling in any activity as long as the GL account falls within this range. Using ranges is also very valuable over here because if you add a new account that falls within the range, you don't have to update these layouts. It will just automatically get picked up in the report the next time you run and refresh the report, okay? But what if I also wanted to apply a fund filter? What if I only wanted activity in this section if it was for a specific fund? So I can come up here to my fund section here, or my fund segment, and let's say I'm going to pick maybe just the general fund, right? So I only want revenue showing up in here if it's revenue that hit my general fund, okay? So that's one way to do that. And you can, again, you can use all of the segments or as many as you need to combine those together in your filter. The other way is this next tab, which says user-defined fields. Now, user-defined fields is not a DrillPoint feature. It's something that's already built into your MIP system, okay? So there's two basic types of user-defined fields in MIP. One is what we call a transaction user-defined field, where you actually put that field on a transaction line and you can put a value in there. The other is really record-based or segment-based user-defined fields. So this example that I'm going to show you here, what we did over in MIP is that on our grant segment, we created a special field that we call category, right? Because what we need to do is we want to categorize our grants as either a local grant, a state grant, or a federal grant. Okay, so we set that field up in MIP. So every time we add a new grant to our general ledger, we put it in a specific category, right, based on those three choices. So over here in MIP, you can see that that grant category field is showing up, right? So what if I wanted to restrict within this segment based on the value of that field? So I just say I want to apply a grant category filter. I want to include, and if I look at my values, it's pulling my values from the UDF by, you know, that were set up. So maybe if I only want state grants to include in here. So now what's going to happen is that it's going to say, all right, when I'm running this report, I'm only going to put in this section if revenue came into Fund 1 between these two GL accounts, and only if it's a state grant. So you can see how now you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of power here to really create these groupings and these filterings the way you need to do that, all within your template without having to run, you know, a series of reports, exporting things out and then combining them after the fact. Okay. Then the third way is by your reporting groups. Again, reporting groups are not a DrillPoint feature. They are something that's already built into MIP. Many of you probably use them already, so that gives you the ability in MIP to really determine your column filters and your column groupings. But what we've done over here is we've made them available also for rows or sections of reports. Okay, so if you're maintaining those reporting groups and you wish to use that type of filter set in a section rather than in a column, you could simply select those here on the reporting groups tab. Okay, so that's really the layout, creating those, and you can see I've got quite a few, you know, different subcategories under each heading, and you can have as many of those as you need, no problem. Now, you'll notice down at the bottom we have this other row within the layout, which is called net revenue over expenses. This is actually an Excel row. So you might say, well, why do you need Excel rows in the body? Well, have you ever wanted to do something like, let's use revenue as an example. Have you ever wanted to do something like have 3 types of revenues and then come to a subtotal, and then some other types of revenue with a subtotal, and then a row that's a grand total? You can easily do that in DrillPoint simply by inserting what we call an Excel node anywhere within this layout. Okay, so if I wanted to say grant revenue, program revenue, and then an Excel row here that subtotal those two, and then below that I have other, and then a grand total that combined everything, I could easily do that just by inserting one of these Excel rows within the layout of the report. Okay, so a lot of flexibility there, a lot of things that make it very easy for you to do without having to jump through a lot of hoops. Okay, so that's your layout, and then from that point forward, you just simply have to add columns to the report. Okay. Now, columns B and C I'm not going to go into because you can see that's just the account and the description. But if we get to column D here on the report, I'm going to highlight column D, and let's go to report columns. So if I come to report columns, you can see there's 3 tabs of information that I need to define in order to make this a column. So up at the top, you're going to put your column title, and I've just put the start date and the end date in brackets, so that way every time I run the report, it's going to put the date range in there for me, so I don't have to type that or hard code that in. Then you come to column type. If I do a drop down here, you can see you can put an actual column, you can do an encumbrance column by itself, or you can combine the two. You can have a budget column, These next two values are what you see here in columns B and C. That pulls from the grouping sections of the layout. This UDF value is if you're using something like a transaction user-defined field, you can actually pull that in and use that in a report. That's more for statistical type reporting. So a quick example there is that maybe you set up a transaction user-defined field that captures the number of meals that you served for a specific week, right? So you have an expense and you enter that expense into MIP, and as you're entering that expense in an MIP, there's a field for you to enter the number of people that you served for that expense. So that saves in MIP. Well, guess what? In DrillPoint, you can have DrillPoint give you a subtotal or give you a total of all of those transactions combined. Then you can have a formula column maybe that takes that total number of people served, divide that by the total expense for that program or that grant, and you can do things like, this is our cost per person served for this time frame, you know, for this specific program. Okay, so that's again making use of user-defined fields within MIP. Or the last option is just an Excel column. Okay, we've picked actual here, so we need to tell it, since this is a revenue and expense report, we're going to choose net activity. Okay, for our balance sheet reporting that you looked at, you can have a beginning balance column and then an ending balance and so on, and you can break debits and credits out separately if you need to do that. Now, the date range is what I was describing earlier about the ability to really define the time frame for each column. So if you look at the period here, if you do a drop down, this is where you're going to define what time frame that you want to go into this column. Those top three are relative periods based on your GL fiscal year, right? So if it's months, then obviously it's going to be the month there. Quarter is going to be based on your GL your quarter. The year is going to be your GL fiscal year. And in this example, this company that I'm working with today, it has a GL fiscal year that starts January 1 and ends December 31. Okay, so it knows that. So what happens is when I pick year, the report automatically knows that I'm referring to January to December. Okay, so it knows that based on the fact that I picked period. Then if you look at this relative period option, this is telling the report, what year do you want? If I wanted the current year, I would set that to 0, but I don't. I want the prior year, so I'm setting that to -1. What if I wanted, you know, 2 years ago? Easily I'd set that to 2 years. So the way this works is, remember when I ran this report at the beginning, I mentioned the effective date. That date's very important because that's really the baseline date for the report. So that's how these relative period options work. So if you remember when I ran this report a few minutes ago, I ran it with an effective date of June 30th, 2011, right? So it automatically knew that I wanted January to June because I have this checked. I told it to cut off as of the date, which basically is a year-to-date rather than giving me the entire year. If I wanted the whole 12 months, I could simply leave that unchecked, okay? So it knew I wanted January to June, but then it says, well, what year does he want? Because I picked year here, and my effective date was 2011, it took that 2011 and backed it up 1 year, okay? If I wanted this to, again, be 2 years ago, I could simply do that. So this type of option that's built in here helps you set these columns, and then you can change and impact the time frame for every column on the report simply by changing the effective date. That way you're not having to come into every column and modify that time frame each time that you want to run that, okay? We have one here also called explicit. So if you're doing things like you want this to be a specific grant term, you could put a start date and an end date for that column, which is what we call the explicit time frame. Or this custom time period is very valuable. What it does is it allows you to say, look at the effective date of the report, go back from that date maybe 5 years and come all the way up to the prior year. So that's going to give you a cumulative 5 years of data, right? And then maybe you want a formula on that that says then divide that by 5. That's going to give me my 5-year average. Then I'm going to compare that to current year and then have a formula column that's a variance that's showing you where we are in the current year versus where we've been on average for the prior 5 years. So that's the type of thing you can do with these custom periods that are available to you as well. within the columns. And then this last tab is your filters. So you also have the ability to filter any column based on any segment or combination of segments, user-defined fields, or there's that reporting group feature that we were talking about earlier. So all that's built in. Now the only difference between column D and E, if I go over to column E, you can see under the date range here, I would set this to 0, right? Because I wanted the current year there. So that would be the only difference between those two. Now, this budget column here, let me show you that budget column. So when we select the budget column here, you notice this additional option here, which is a drop down, which is showing you all of your versions of your budget, right? So you select which version of the budget you want to go into this column. So you can have, a report that has multiple budget columns. Maybe you have different budget scenarios in the system, and you want to kind of see a comparison between those. You can easily do that as well, okay? So that's really the layout of the report and how you create a report. And again, from that, it's just a matter of clicking on Report Refresh to get the updated data and information built into the report, okay? Any questions, Bob, that have been entered into the question window?
No.
All right. Well, it looks like we've got about 15 minutes left in the hour. So what we'll do now is we'll switch over here, and if anyone has any questions that they couldn't enter in, we'll give you the ability to go ahead and raise your hand, and if you do that, we'll then take you off mute and let you ask that question. So go ahead and click the hand raise, and we'll be happy to take you off mute. All right, let's see. I see a hand raised. Let's see. Pat, are you there? Hello, Pat. All right, so we'll go on to the next one. Anybody else? Anyone have any questions that they need to ask at this point? Okay, very well.
Bobby, there is a question, and I'll go ahead and field this. So there's a question about what the price of the the packages are, and I can tell you, without the training component, because obviously that's going to be a function of whoever you're working with, be it your partner or Abila. The packages themselves for the single designer and single viewer package is $1,995. And then the multi-user package that comes with 2 designers and 5 viewers is going to be $2,995. And at that multi-user package level, then you can begin adding individual designers and viewers at will. Your maintenance is calculated at the same rate you're currently paying Abila, and it'll be added on and prorated to your Abila maintenance bill. We have another question here. The question is, do the changes made in DrillPoint affect reports in MIP?
So that answer to that is no, because keep in mind these reports are completely and totally separate from any of your reports within MIP. These are reports that you're going to build within Excel itself. Okay, and you're going to save these outlines and save these reports and have the ability to run, refresh, and then drill down into the data.
So additional clarification, Robbie. So changes need to be made in MIP if it's a report that the managers want to continue to use.
Right, so if your managers are currently accessing your MIP system and running reports inside of MIP, that process wouldn't necessarily change. That wouldn't have any impact on DrillPoint. I guess the thought process there would be, you know, would these types of reports over in DrillPoint be more beneficial to them to be able to actually run the reports within DrillPoint rather than having to access the MIP system? You know, because at that point, then they could drill down and see a lot more detail that they probably aren't currently able to see and access within the standard MIP report. So that might be something that would be a little more beneficial. Plus, you can, I'll say this lightly, you can keep them out of your accounting system. All right. Any other questions before we give you back maybe 10 minutes of the hour? Okay, I don't see any other questions. So, Bob, I'll turn it back over to you to close everything out.
All right. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for attending. There will be a survey that will pop up when you leave the meeting today. In that survey, please let us know what type of follow-up information you want. Keep in mind, we have recorded this demonstration today, so that can be part of your request, is to receive a link to the demonstration that you can review at your leisure. And we will be having your partner or Abila follow up with you from today's meeting based on that feedback that we're getting. So thank you again for your time, and we do appreciate your interest in the DrillPoint product.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, Robbie,
Bye-bye.
there is one final quick question here. The user-defined fields, are those accessible in the system?
Yes. So in MIP, you know, you can have a user-defined field, which is a transaction user-defined field. So as I mentioned, when you're entering either a journal entry or you're paying an accounts payable invoice, you might have a field on the transaction line. If you put an amount or something in that line, then you can actually include those in the column of the report over here in DrillPoint, and then you can do calculations on those numbers that come within that as well. So you can do more statistical type reporting over here in DrillPoint by taking advantage of those transaction-based user-defined fields. Certainly can. Great question.
We do have a hand up, Robbie. I think Tim has a question.
Okay, Tim, you have not put your PIN number in on the audio section, so I'm not able to take you off mute. I'll be happy to do that if you can enter your PIN number in.
Yeah, I would just recommend in this scenario, we'll go ahead and Tim, if you notate in your follow-up what your question was, we'll get that answered for you. But again, thank you everybody for attending, and with that, we'll sign off for the day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.